Hey, so it's World Mental Health Day, and I decided to make a video about this, about something that's really, really important to me, anxiety. Like, anxiety is really important to me, and I think it's a subject that is really undervalued in the world, and we focus on the wrong part of it. We focus on the fact that everyone has it, but we kind of downplay the magnitude of effect that it has on all of us. We think that just because anxiety is needed for us to survive, I mean, anxiety is how we remembered certain things like to run when lions were chasing us, or, you know, that when a storm was coming, floods and lightning were coming, we needed to find shelter. Those were ways that anxiety could save our life. But now we live in a world that's, you know, so modern where we have our instincts are almost hijacked. And as somebody who has a lot of experience in marketing and advertising, I can guarantee that our anxiety is no longer about survival. Our anxiety is being manipulated for, you know, other purposes. And at the end of, my 20s, I started looking into, like, how can I address this anxiety? I had gone through all the mainstream Western, medicine, pharmaceutical stuff to address bigger issues, the things that people typically worry about, the bipolars, the schizophrenias, the major depression disorders, those kind of things. Everyone in my family was afraid of, my suicide and stuff like that. And like, those kind of things were like the big boogeymen. But, after I really found a way to sedate and cope through life, and sacrificing a lot of things that most people, you know, it felt like most people didn't sacrifice, but I'm learning more and more people have. I didn't graduate high school. I became an entrepreneur because I couldn't hold a 9-to-5 job. I couldn't find success as an entrepreneur because I couldn't figure out how to, you know, budget time or money and things like that. I wasn't able to, make it through college or any of those things. I really could only attempt at things like trade school, which are very, very valuable, but even I couldn't cut those things. I figured out how to cope and sedate, through pretty much the entirety of my 20s. And then something had to give. And once I realized that maybe intellectual answers aren't the answer to everything, maybe, the scientific method isn't enough to address something like anxiety, because it felt like there was nothing I could do other than sedate to resolve my anxiety. And I wanted, better options. So I decided to look into things like data science and really addressing things in a holistic way. I was really inspired by a book called My Age of Anxiety, where they take a very comprehensive look at the history of anxiety and seeing a lot of patterns that arise today. And when I started to realize that there were more answers for how to overcome anxiety outside of medicine than within medicine, I thought that was kind of peculiar. Medicine is very, the scientific method, but not very data science heavy in the way of looking at trends and patterns. And, it's very controlled environment, because it's made, like, the way the Western world looks at medicine, it's about treating things. And, the treatments for anxiety, I don't know about you, but I've never found one that was, worked to the point where it was truly sustainable. It always asked me to sacrifice something. It asked me to sacrifice my motivation, my creativity. And in a world where it's harder to get motivated than ever, it's, creativity is in more demand than ever, I realized something had to give. So I started looking into alternative options, really addressing myself. And what I can say is, I've made some major breakthroughs, and I want to share this hope that there is hope out there. And like I said, I went through a lot of the mainstream routes, psychotherapy, psychiatry, medication, pharmaceuticals, supplements, all these kind of things, like everything I could find. Like I'm very big into the whole like mentor guide model. So like therapy and those kind of things were really, really good for me, but it was really, really difficult to find somebody who wanted to treat the person and not just the illness. And that took a long time to find, a lot of money. Like I come from a very blessed and privileged family. A lot of money went into my treatment, but a lot of time and energy went into, my cure for anxiety. We live in a world where we don't need to be running away from, lions, or we don't need to be looking for shelter every single time a storm comes up. So like anxiety plays a role in our survival, but at the end of the day, like we don't need it as much as we experience it. And when I started to realize that some of the things I had learned as a marketer and advertiser were kind of bugging me, that like, the reason I have so much anxiety is because of other people who do things like me, not just because of marketers and advertisers. We're not the reason everyone has anxiety. The reason everyone has anxiety is because, the way the modern world works is everything from politics to religion to, capitalism needs to manipulate people's anxiety to progress forward. Um, and then I realized, there's another way to do it. I can educate myself in how to not need that kind of external motivation or manipulation. So I started looking into it, and I dug deep, and I decided to make some radical shifts and changes. So some of the things that helped me the most are, I decided to stop using my main social media platform. And for me, as um, a mid to younger millennial, uh, it was Facebook. I was on that tail end of like the Facebook users of the millennial generation. Never quite got into the Instagram, so I decided to go hard. I switched my usage of Facebook from a social platform to an open journal. I started documenting everything. I started open sourcing my secrets, everything, no holds bar. It created a lot of chaos in my mind because I gave myself permission to speak freely. I burned a lot of bridges, a lot of which needed to be burned, some of which, you know, I wouldn't say I regret, but I learned a lot. Um, and I hope that someday those people can understand that I learned a lot. Um, and I really regret that there isn't a better way of dealing with anxiety, that I didn't feel like I had to experiment and play fast and loose with everything that I had at my disposal, and not have some guidelines that were more readily available for better practice. But I found my better practices. I used Facebook as my open journal, um, and I started making micro changes. I started applying the 80/20 rule to things that were not good for me because I didn't want to go all or nothing. So I started cutting out, 80% of things that were making it hard for me to stabilize, like sugar, or, recreational social media usage, or sodium, or all sorts of things. I didn't want to cut out, everything. So I cut out like 80% of like processed meats, and then other processed foods, and then processed dairy, and then it just kind of grew and evolved, and some of the things I kept in and other things I cut out. And what's interesting is, over the course of a year, it's kind of turned into look like a diet, but I've really just been listening to myself, what I need more and more. Um, and I found a lot of progress. Even now, like, I work out, and all sorts of things. I've changed my life drastically. I've lost about over 100 pounds on the scale, and gained, probably close to 50 pounds in muscle. I've changed my habits drastically, one step at a time. Like, you know, even wanted to build better habits to the point where, like, break it down into micro chunks, and It's been life-changing, and what I can say is there's hope out there. There's ways to change, and I just wanted to share my story on this day to give other people hope. So thank you.